Guys, today I will tell you what the best main DPS are for free-to-play players. Free-to-play is a pretty arbitrary concept, so first thing I will do is establish some rules for this ranking. No 5-star constellations and no 5-star weapons. Technically, they're things a free-to-play player can obtain by saving Primogems, but I don't think it's generally the norm or wise. Obviously, no battle pass weapons. If a character needs specific constellation 6 4-stars, he will be penalized, and the same goes for if he needs specific 5-star teammates you wouldn't otherwise pull for, like Shen-He for example. So I'm trying to make it as fair as possible for players who don't spend. Obviously, it's a partially subjective ranking and won't match everybody's expectations, but I will try my best, I guess. 10th place, Navia. I already talked about her in a guide I made a few days ago, but here I will elaborate more on where she stands at free-to-play investment specifically. I like Navia in this list because she's pretty flexible in terms of team usages. As a Geo character, she doesn't really care a lot about specific elemental reactions, she just needs a bit of elemental application from teammates to consistently trigger crystallizes, and she's good to go. This puts her in a very advantageous spot for the purpose of this ranking, because if you have Navia on your account, odds are you will be able to make an acceptable team for her regardless of what your roster looks like. However, sadly, the damage ceiling over teams at this level doesn't match what you will see later in the video for other characters. Her best free-to-play option is the Melusine Claymore, an event-locked weapon that you might not have, something a lot of people complained about in the comments of my Navia guide. The alternative will be Tidal Shadow, the Fontaine craftable, that however can be quite situational since it's tied to the character receiving heals to activate its offensive effects. She will be in a much better place if she could use the Serpent Spine for example, but that's a pay-locked weapon. 9th place, Brizzly. Brizzly is a quite versatile cryo main carry that can fit quite well in several freeze and melt teams. As far as free-to-play options go, he has Flowing Purity, Ballad, and Witsit. The first two are pretty general options that provide him good buffs all around, while Witsit is good on melt more than anything, since that's the only team where the elemental mastery it can provide becomes useful. Melt is also my favorite type of Brizzly team, specifically Furina, Xiangling, Bennett, and Brizzly. It's a pretty nice team that performs greatly both in single target and in AoE content thanks to Xiangling. It's also a team where Brizzly not having high investment options like his signature weapon doesn't really feel like too much of a loss, as the other members on the team are contributing to quite the damage. Fritz teams are also quite nice, with variations of them containing the strong Hydro sub DPS of the meta, Xingqiu, Furina, Yelan. While these teams don't have as high of a ceiling as the Melt team I mentioned before in terms of damage, they can be comfier to use thanks to the freeze reactions to unlocking opponents. It must be noted, however, that Brizzly is one of the characters that gains the most from Dolphin level investment in this whole game. His signature is one of the best 5-star weapons in the game, period. His Constellation 1 makes his charge attacks much more integral to his overall gameplay, resulting both in a massive damage increase and in better quality of life, since the charge attacks have healing properties. However, even then, I believe that his free-to-play performance is good enough compared to the rest of the Genshin characters that he deserves a spot on this list regardless. 8. Child. The oldest character in this list. He came out all the way back in 1.1. And is still going very strong, although probably not quite as much as in the past unfortunately. The free-to-play value of Child mainly comes from the fact that a good chunk of what he does in battle isn't tied to his damage. In fact, it comes from his fantastic AoE Hydro application that plays an essential role in maximizing the performance of characters like Xiangling. To this day, Child is still the best Xiangling enabler in the game, and with Xiangling still being one of the best AoE DPS in the full game, Child earns a spot in this list. Still, while the focus is not on his damage, so getting a good 5-star weapon on him won't make a night and day difference compared to free-to-play options like Rust, Cloudforged or Song of Stillness, it still makes him considerably better. Specifically, his Elemental Burst is a very powerful tool to initiate the rotation by wiping out an entire enemy wave, but to do so it needs to reach a specific damage threshold that typically only becomes reachable with 5-star weapons. Moreover, his Riptides can deal quite high amounts of damage in AoE scenarios, so in those situations not having a 5-star weapon can feel pretty bad. Regardless, his international teams are still great at free-to-play investment overall, and while they don't have the same single target performance as teams featuring carries ranked below, their dominance in AoE is hard to understate. As for other compositions for him, he hasn't exactly got much, unfortunately. I guess he can be used on Hyperbloom, Burgeon, but His cooldowns make him a pretty tough fit in those situations compared to other carries, so they're just a very niche type of use for him, and ultimately this is what penalizes him in this list. 7th, Clorand. Clorand is the best Electro DPS for Dendro teams. The fate is similar to characters like Yae or Keqing here, but she's just better in terms of damage contribution overall. Her free-to-play weapons will be Finale of the Deep and Lion's Roar, both being usable on pretty much all the teams she can fit in. However, unlike the aforementioned Electros, Clorand isn't just tied to Dendro teams. In fact, her damage profile is more flexible than theirs, as she's a more traditional main DPS in that sense, so she can fit better on Chevreuse teams, Electro Charge teams, and so on. Still, it's undeniable that her bread and butter are her Dendro teams, mostly because her best ally, Fischl, is magnified the best here. However, in the past few weeks, she received a lot of criticism, understandably so I would say, because she does have flaws like a lack of interruption resistance or relatively low fill time for a main DPS, but I feel like the more you play her and become accustomed to her playstyle, the less you start to notice these issues, and once you can get past them, she does have pretty stellar Quicken and Quick Bloom teams that allow her to breeze through obstacles. Just like Grizzly, she gets very big damage increases from her signature weapon and constellations, but once again, I don't mind it as long as the free-to-play performance is good, and clearly that's the case here. 6th, Raiden. Raiden is one of the most versatile characters in the whole game. Being Electro already allows her to fit in plenty of elemental teams as a baseline, but compared to her peers, she accentuates this aspect by being a mix between a carry and a support. Her energy-related effects and burst damage bonuses for the whole team are well known at this point, and they single-handedly make her a carry that can be at least useful for a variety of teams that might be unmatched in this full ranking quantity-wise. Double Hydro teams with 2 of Yelan, Xinqiao and Furina, national teams with Ling, Yae teams, and even teams where Raiden is a bigger damage contributor like Sarah teams, Chevreuse teams. Of course, she also fits well on Quicken teams, Quick Bloom teams, and honestly, I could name many more uses because of the way her team-related energy effects can make about any composition much easier and comfier to play. Her own damage isn't the focus on a good chunk of these teams, but when it is, she's got a fantastic free-to-play option in the catch that can almost evenly compete with Engulfing Lightning in situations where Raiden is getting many attack buffs, which is something that very frequently takes place in the teams where her damage is relevant due to the presence of characters like Bennett or Sarah. In terms of damage ceiling, none of her teams are extremely impressive, I guess, but her flexibility as well as her ease of use thanks to her full interruption resistance among other things make her a great option for any free-to-play player still. Then, if you want to go even further, she can even be considered the main DPS on full Hyperbloom teams, where she's built with elemental mastery and just plays off-field with her elemental skill. Just her and Cookie can consistently do this in the Electro niche off-field, so it's another thing that plays to her benefits. 5th, Hu Tao. Hu Tao is a character that back in the day was pretty good at free-to-play investment, but just fantastic at pay-to-win investment, and now I feel like the gap between the two investment levels is getting smaller. The reason is that she has now many teams with strong sub-DPS that can share damage responsibilities with her, so there is less emphasis on Hu Tao specifically having incredible weapon options like Staff of Homa or executing perfect charge attack combos, which becomes much easier with her Constellation 1. In terms of free-to-play weapons, she has Dragon's Bane, and while it can't quite stand up to Homa, it does the job sufficiently well on all of her teams. Double Hydro teams are now the norm with Hu Tao for free-to-play players. Two between Xinqiao, Yelan and Furina are usually in her teams, and the sheer damage these character combinations can easily produce really lowers the degree of difficulty of these compositions. In terms of single target ceiling, Hu Tao pretty much stands at the very top of this ranking, and if you want to magnify this aspect of hers more, you can try using the hyper teams with Yelan, Kazu and Bennett. Harder to use for sure, but worth the effort in the right context. She now also has Plunge teams with Xianyun, which to me are her easiest teams to play because they're simpler in terms of combo execution and also stronger in terms of AoE damage thanks to the Plunge's range. However, I consider Xianyun less of a general use 5-star compared to Yelan, Furina and Kazuha, so I'm not giving this particular team much value for the purpose of this list. 4th, Nilou. Nilou is definitely not a main carry if you strictly see this role as someone who stays on field and deals significant damage to the opponents. She's pretty much the opposite of that. She stays off field for most of the rotation, and most of the team damage isn't coming from her. The team sure as hell has to thank her for that damage though. Her blue mechanics are just team-defining. Like, she makes this Bloom Elemental reaction a game-shattering factor in AoE scenarios, even at free-to-play investment, and this is enough for me to consider her the carry of the team, because she's practically carrying the damage of the team. However, just like for some characters mentioned before, Nilou teams gain a tremendous amount of damage from her getting premium options like her signature weapon and her constellation too. Still, her Bloom team damage is generally so high at free-to-play investment in AoE scenarios that the difference between that and pay-to-win variants isn't all that noticeable, honestly. It becomes more of a factor in single-target situations typically, where the Bloom generation becomes more situational, and so every ounce of damage increase starts mattering more. However, honestly, there is no amount of investment that makes Nilou teams particularly strong in these scenarios to me. This is also the weakness that keeps Nilou from ranking higher in this list, because despite being the most free-to-play friendly character for a specific niche, this niche only covers a part of the game, and so she can rank higher to me. Third, Arlecchino. I know, you expected her to rank a little bit higher, but come on, third isn't all that bad. Arlecchino is an amazing DPS, and one of the highest in this list in terms of pure damage dealing at free-to-play investment. She's pretty much a less restricted version of Hu Tao in terms of team possibilities and combo executions. For one, she has the highest raw damage among all Pyro DPS, something that makes her a great fit even on reaction-less teams, unlike Hu Tao. Mono Pyro and Chevreuse teams in particular are quite strong compositions where Arlecchino fits like a glove. Of course, she also fits on Vape teams, and since her elemental application is more forgiving than Hu Tao's, she's easier to play with characters like Yelan and Furina from an offensive standpoint. The defensive standpoint is a whole other matter, however. She can be healed by other characters and can only heal herself through her elemental burst that she can only use at the end of the rotation, so she's quite fragile. This fragility can be ignored at high investment levels, where she starts dealing so much damage that the enemies just die before her, but at free-to-play investment this is not possible. Like, she can't just face tank everything. So while I believe that her ceiling is quite great even at low investment, she's definitely not easy to play and can even feel frustrating in some situations, forcing you to use characters like Zhongli and trade plenty of offensive powers for defensive utility. As for her best free-to-play weapon, White Tassel is the consistently great option. It's nothing amazing, just a 3-star weapon after all, but Arlecchino is so strong that she can make it work. Second, Alhaitham. Alhaitham is a great carry for sure, but I want to make it clear from the start that it's not his kit that by itself makes him better than characters like Arlecchino in this list. There are two other reasons actually. First, Dendro teams like Hyperbloom are free-to-play friendly in general, thanks to how easy it is for free-to-play players to reach the elemental reaction damage ceiling through elemental mastery investment. Second, he has a 3-star weapon option that competes with premium 4-star and 5-star options, and that is the Harbinger of Dawn. Harbinger of Dawn is a weapon with great crit-based effects, but it also has serious weaknesses. First, low base attack, and second, it requires your character to be above 90% HP to take advantage of the effects. The first is never an issue for Alhaitham, as a big chunk of his scaling and damage comes from elemental mastery. The second can technically be a problem for a main DPS like him, but it realistically rarely is, because it is constantly teamed up with either Zhongli or healers like Kuki, Baiju or Yao Yao. As a result, Alhaitham has all the tools to succeed even at free-to-play investment, and it does so in plenty of teams. His strongest ones are the quick bloom compositions, specifically the ones with Furina, but the variants with Yelan and Xingqiu are also really powerful and foolproof. Alhaitham's quicken teams are also pretty great, as he's a character that deals quite the damage and feels incredibly smooth to use thanks to how flexible his rotations are. Now, before I finish this ranking, I want to talk about a few of the characters I didn't mention yet, just to justify my choices. Line that would be in this list if it wasn't free-to-play focused, because in terms of damage potential at high investment is up there with the rest of the game really, like up there with Arlecchino I would say. But the flip side, however, is that a free-to-play investment isn't all that honestly, and specifically suffers from missing 5-star weapons like Aqua or his signature. The problem is that without great weapons, his burst damage will start to feel lacking, and this forces him into longer fights where he has to use a lot of his charge attacks to finish opponents, a scenario where he becomes really vulnerable to enemy attacks. Then Wander and Xiao, both great characters for sure, but both dependent on having Constellation 6 Ferrotan for example, and Xiao also needs Xianyun that is a pretty niche 5-star to pull for, so I don't consider that free-to-play friendly. If the parameters were less strict, they would definitely be in the list, but as things stand now, no. Then Sino, Tainari, Kitsing, Yae. the Dendro team, like the Dendro DPS. All of these characters obviously fit on Quicken and Quickbloom teams that are pretty great compositions as a baseline, but I wouldn't say any of them is on the level of Clorand. It's also harder for me to consider Ketsing, Yae, Tainari carries on the same level as the carries in this list, because often on their own teams they're out-damaged by Fischl, and so you can make the case that in single target situations specifically, Fischl becomes the carry of the team. Things are different for Cyno, because Cyno is a more traditional DPS in his Quickbloom team specifically, where he deals a lot of damage, but the thing is, in the best variant of this team, that is Furina, Baiju and Nahida, it needs Baiju to be there, and I consider Baiju to be a pretty niche 5-star to pull for compared to Yelan, Kazuha and Nahida, so this penalizes him for the list, and anyway, I wouldn't consider him to be at the same level as Clorand either. Lastly, Ayato and Kokomi, that are pretty nice free-to-play carries, but have some flaws that keep them out of this list. Specifically, in Ayato's case, he enables a lot of teams really, but I don't think any of these teams has noteworthy damage potential, and while this puts him in the same discussion as Raiden pretty much, I think what Raiden does for her own teams is more unique than what Ayato does for these teams he enables. For Kokomi, nowadays she's only a carry on the triple Hydro Furina teams that she can enable through her healing, but the thing is, her damage on these teams is not really that special, like she heals the team so she enables them, but her own damage is just pretty low, like lower than Yelan, lower than Furina, and while Raiden is in the same spot for many of her teams, the thing with Kokomi is that she only fits here as a carry, like she doesn't really have many other options nowadays as an on-field DPS. So, number 1, Neuvillette. Of course Neuvillette. How could it be otherwise? Now, before I jump to the positives, I will say that the Neuvillette does have some flaws at free-to-play investment. His best free-to-play weapon, Prototype Amber, is much worse than Sacrificial Jade and his signature. Also, his lack of interruption resistance can feel annoying, and this is something that gets fixed by his Constellation 1, at which point he becomes a literally perfect character. However, even with these flaws, he stands at the very top of this list because his damage is still more than fine with Prototype Amber, and more importantly, his massive gameplay-related advantages just put him in a different tier compared to others in this list. Neuvillette is able to hit every opponent in the room in just about every instance, and this is a massive advantage, especially at free-to-play investment, where the lack of damage can really be felt if you don't handle the opponents perfectly from a tactical standpoint. Neuvillette doesn't really need to care about tactics, he just needs to use his skill and burst and demolish the room effortlessly. His teams also help him hide the weaknesses I mentioned before. Specifically, the presence of Zhongli as a teammate makes the lack of interruption resistance irrelevant, and he has access to free-to-play friendly compositions like Hype Bloom that can alleviate the feeling of low investment on him. Still, his hyper teams with Furina and Kazuha are very powerful and allow him to achieve impressive results even at the investment level considered for this list. And that's it. It wasn't easy making this ranking, I'm sure I will receive a lot of complaints from people that claim, oh, I can use this character with a 3-star weapon and destroy the base, it should be higher. But look, these are just my thoughts, my subjective thoughts on each character I talked about, and it's just my list. Let's stay friends. So, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and also go check the Navia guide I made a few days ago. Bye bye.